Welcome to this episode of the People Dividend. I'm your host, Mike Horne, and I'm thrilled to have in the virtual studio today a colleague, maybe a friend, Dan Taylor. Dan Taylor began a career in high-tech corporate finance management. And he also started a fitness education business in 1998. So for those of you who are counting, that's some time. His singular focus is guiding the mature athlete in evidence-based, field-tested methods to train safely and effectively and to eat for optimal health and performance while managing a busy life. Dan has a master's degree in exercise physiology, sports nutrition, is a certified strength and conditioning specialist through the National Strength and Conditioning Association, and a former continuing ed provider for the American Council on Exercise and the National Academy of Sports Medicine, and a former contributing health and fitness writer for Patch.com. He practices and promotes a practical, challenging, low-risk, high-yield approach to fitness and performance eating. Well, Dan, that's great. I mean, that is you in a nutshell. Why don't you say a few words about yourself?
It sounds so great when you say it, Mike. I appreciate that. So I guess probably boiling it down to the most basic level, I help people. I help people in a way that I have some familiarity and experience and track record for guiding a particular profile from whatever starting level of condition they are to a more empowered, enabled, in some cases specifically for a sports or athletic application. In some cases, it's just improved quality of life. But the longer I've done this, and I'm coming up on close to 30 years, I have tended to attract more peers, more people in the, sort of 50 to 70 plus range who are pretty serious about their fitness. And they really want to make sure that they're not wasting their time. Obviously, that becomes an increasingly precious resource for us. And especially for longtime athletes who may have accumulated either injuries, surgeries, or a predisposition for a particular type of injury, they want to make sure that they're training in a way that not only helps them avoid injury during the training process, but makes it much more likely that they'll avoid injury when they're using that fitness, whether it's playing volleyball or cleaning out the garage. So in grad school, that's what I was able to kind of focus my attention on, that area of research, which is really scant. It's just pretty much masters athletes, and then you can extrapolate some points from a broader age population. But basically, the bottom line is you and I in our age range community, we share more qualities and capacities with those decades younger who practice the same training and eating habits than we do our contemporaries who don't, or don't do it in as efficient way as they could.
I'd like to go back to where you began, which was the topic of introducing yourself as a helper. And I'd like you to, I have my reasons for this, which we'll eventually get to, I hope, unless you want me to bring them forward, which is to talk about why you use those words. And about that, that defines a certain way or relationship.
Right. So I think for my work, what I've noticed is as I've been able to attract and then work successfully with the profiles that for whom I am a better fit, there's a vernacular that you have with partners or peers in a group setting that the underpinnings of that are understood. The contextual commonalities are understood. I'm not a good trainer for an entry point person who isn't sure that they want to start living a healthier lifestyle. I'm a good fit for somebody who already practices that and has grabbed whatever information they could from their prior experiences with other trainers or with coaches or with athlete peers or just on the internet, kind of trying to sort through all of the myriad of guidance from gurus or self-appointed gurus, or even academics, where it's just kind of trying to search through and find what's relevant specific to me. So for me, breaking it down to being helpful for the person I'm a good fit for, a big part of that is for us to kind of suss out whether I am a good fit. And I will be helpful with somebody that I see 3 times a week for 10 years, as helpful as I can be within the context of that relationship. I'll be helpful as I can be with somebody that I have a brief conversation with at a wedding reception, where it comes up and we just kind of scratch the surface. But I've noticed over the years, it's really helpful for me to dismantle my ego, which I've been told is sizable by some very reliable sources, that I know that can be an obstacle for me. And so one of the things that I've really worked on is to always try to retain the lion's share of my attention to listening and trying to figure out where I am going to be most helpful, which might just be smiling and nodding like you're doing right now. Or it might be, here's what I heard about that. You got chronic tendonitis in your forearm. Okay, do you do a lot of computer work? Or so I might see something where I can just offer a very brief insight that's helpful and maybe starts them down a path with someone else. But I just want to be helpful in that moment for whatever the context of the relationship is. And I don't worry too much about what it turns in. You and I have had conversations about this. The less you worry about what it turns into for you, the more fully and helpfully you show up. Right?
Sure. Difference between results and outcomes in some ways. I told you I had a reason for asking about the help question. And, when I talk with the people in this audience about what I do, I offer 3 services. I offer one-on-one executive coaching for people who are in the C-suite. They might be a founder, they might be a CEO, or they might be an aspirant to a C-suite, somebody targeted for some additional development. It might come as a result of a conflict between a board and a CEO founder. But so some focus on one-on-one executive C-suite coaching that happens in a 3, 6, or 12-month period. The second thing I do is I work with a cohort, a group within an organization who wants to develop their leadership skills. And that can come in a couple flavors and a couple varieties of, how that's put together with a group of 5 to 8 to 12 people over the course of 6 to 18 months. And the third thing I do, and this is where it gets to the helping question, is I offer my expertise in organization development. I intervene as an organization development person would to improve, to make progress in team or organizational dynamics. So companies will hire me, clients will hire me to help them redesign their research and development organization, or facilitate a strategic, a key meeting, or to work on team development. So, those are the Mike Horne offerings. And in this last area, my organization development expertise, one of the guys who contributed a lot to the field is named Ed Schein. Ed had recently passed away in the last couple of years. But he was at MIT for a long time, and he wrote a lot of seminal books on organizational culture and how to think about organizational cultures and process consultation, how to consult to attend a task and processes in groups. As a social psychologist attracted to Lewin. So all of that's a way to say that, and one of his books was called Helping, sort of towards the end of his career. But when the last time I heard him speak was on the topic of helping, and how it was really the central question that he had woven and thought about his entire career. And I mean, he, in his book Helping, he frames it as a noble profession to help, and many people don't come with that approach to it.
Right.
It's a long-winded explanation about how we got there, but that's what how you introduced yourself prompted that.
Right. Well, I understand you laying the groundwork for all that, because for me, it highlights the universality of that intention across different industries and across different subject of guidance relationships. It really doesn't have to be constrained to any particular type of business partnership or relationship. It's just golden, no matter, even in a personal relationship, right?
I wonder to what extent, in some ways, I'm grateful when I am aware of a client's industry, whether it's in technology or biopharma or biotech, or some place that's been familiar to me as I've helped build teams and organizations, global entities around the world, is thinking about, what's the, that I could almost do this anywhere, industry doesn't matter, but it does help to know about it. I wonder how, when you approach client situations in your helping relationship, Dan, and doing what you do in all those, wonderful ways that describe you, what is it that you see in that helping relationship that makes that brings progress to people you work with?
Well, there are a lot of qualities, but I think, and there are, there's a Venn diagram, right? There's a lot of overlap, but I think, tying to your overall theme of integrity and people-centric guidance and direction, I think it's an openness and an understanding, which you convey both directly with how you address someone, but more indirectly with how you listen to them and really looking for what it is that's an obstacle or a sticking point, or we can use the cliche, the pain point, but in my case, for current clients, it can be a literal pain. It could be referral pain from a dysfunctional joint, but really any area of difficulty or challenge. How does that match up with what I already have available? And then at a second level, do I have access? And maybe it's just referring them to somebody, or maybe it's doing some research on my own. But what is, as they're speaking to me, does it trigger recognition of a pattern, of correlation between certain types of, movements or an athletic background? I look for things in what they're saying in the moment that triggers something that I think might be helpful. And then if I think it might be helpful, I frame it that way. Or I'll talk about why I think it might be helpful. But there's an openness to involve them in the process of trying to find a solution where I'm very specific and try to maintain what I'll call relevant transparency. And what I mean by that is what I do and what I don't know about this thing I think might be helpful to discuss based on what they've told me. So the scope and the nature of the relationship is what it is during the consultation, whether I see them after that point or not. But somebody I've seen for 15 years, 3 days a week, and I know all their kids' names and I know their entire physical, movement background. There's a richness there that
right.
provides, right? So whatever that relevant set of circumstances is I'm transparent about here's something I think might be helpful, or sounds like it might be good for you to see this massage therapist that I've worked with for years, who was a trainer before she was a massage therapist. So she really understands an athletic profile, especially in a 50, 60 plus age range. And I think another thing, and this has been more difficult for me, and I wore this shirt not unintentionally because, as I mentioned, ego has been more of an obstacle for me over the years. And going into a personal service business where I have to subordinate my own interests really to be truly successful, which is to help people, right? The degree to which I help people. I would say another piece of that is when you're dealing with somebody and they don't know whether you can be helpful yet. They don't know whether you're in it for the right reason. They don't know if your heart's in it. They don't know if you're a good fit, whatever it is. I would say an important approach for me has been radical disregard for being perceived in a particular way. Mm-hmm. Really circling back to, can I be helpful? To what degree can I be helpful? And how exactly can I be helpful? And don't worry about what's going to come after that.
It's so interesting because it relates to a lot of the themes in the People Dividend. You know, there's part of the People Dividend where I'm explaining that how, you know, as an employee, I sometimes just felt like I was a cog in the vast machinery of the organization where my potential was glossed over by the very people who were tasked with bringing out the best in me.
Right.
And then I even think about my own experiences as a manager, and you get caught up in the whirlwind of pleasing superiors, navigating your own career trajectory,
Sure.
ticking off task lists, that you lose sight of often, what's most important, which is the talent right in front of you. So I've written on this, and I can relate it to what you're just saying, is that because I think this is what people don't bring to their physicality. I translate this into the management and executive and leadership development world. Poor managerial practices, failing to recognize achievements, not providing constructive feedback, or simply not listening can diminish even the brightest and most resilient workers. Poor management contributes to teams and organizations where potential is squandered. The cost, a profound drag on the morale, productivity, and innovations of teams and organizations alike. Well, isn't that true? Like when you don't pay attention to your physicality, right, Dan?
Yeah, it's definitely true. And we tend to, and of course there are exceptions to this, but I think over the years we tend to take for granted whatever our physical functional capabilities are, what our capacities are, pain-free movement or ability to apply force or endurance, however hard it is for you to walk up 3 flights of stairs or whatever, where we start to expect what was normal, 30 years ago, that it'll keep producing itself without any nurturing or without any understanding of the erosion process or how to renew that. And yeah, absolutely, it's very similar to taking for granted talent in your especially in your immediate employee. I used to work for a gentleman who I'm happy to say is still a good friend. I keep in touch with him. I consider him a mentor. Both he and his boss, I was in Costa County, he was a Costa County manager, and his boss was the controller, and it was a tech company. And Doug, who was my boss, he did exactly what you're talking about. He looked you in the eye. There was no question about whether he was actually listening to you. Sometimes his response would give you guidance on, wrapping it up and avoiding unnecessary, irrelevant detail, but it was always done with compassion, always done clear. It was clear where his heart was at. And it was clear how well practiced he was at deftly keeping things efficient while giving complete and total attention to the person for the purpose of nurturing their sense of individual value and value to the group and the organization. And we used to joke, the finance group. We used to joke, well, not really joke, but we went through when Jim, the controller, left. As people do for better opportunities, right? We were all in a state of mourning for about 3 weeks, and it wasn't. He was a talented guy, really bright, talented guy. It wasn't mostly because of that. It was because every single morning he came in and he had a brief exchange with every single employee. And he listened and he cared, and it's reflected in his comments. And we would have done anything for him, because it mattered to him that we were there. It mattered to him that we were who we were.
Right.
And so the receptivity in both directions was off the charts.
Right. Yes, I understand that. And I read about somewhere in the People Dividend about having one of those leaders who seemed intently engaged in me, sometimes didn't like my work, was always honest and transparent. And that made such an incredible difference, I think, in terms of the exercise of discretionary efforts. But Dan, I want to go back to what I think you were saying. I want to bring your experience into this. I think there are some genetic markers or indicators that make differences between goal setters and people and discipline traits.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also say that there's malleability to that to some degree, because sometimes people associate with peers, or they have a really good relationship with their guide or their coach or whatever. They can dig deeper into that well.
Yeah. Yes. So which do you think would be more important to have in terms of long-term success, discipline or goal? And I agree with everything that you just said.
Yeah, I would say, this is just my opinion, but by a long shot, discipline. Because discipline is something that everybody
10,000 hours. You need 10,000 hours to.
Well, maybe deciding what's the best way to spend 3,000 of those hours and making that a priority, right? So discipline doesn't just come from repetitive practice. Discipline can come from the constant reinforcement of actions that reinforce a particular point of progress. That especially if that progress towards that goal becomes more important, if you become more personally identified with not just the hope for ultimate outcome, but the actual process of progression towards that. So I would say a goal can be really important to you, but it has, by definition, potentially fleeting or volatile qualities, where discipline is self-directed, self-applied, and will serve you in all areas of life. So you become more appreciative of that, just that quality. Even I'll give you an example. In order to get an accounting job, I went back, because I had dropped out of college during my second semester, and then I ended up in high tech, and then I got a kind of a introduction entry-level position in an accounting group. And then that was my goal. I wanted to be an accountant. So I went back to school, and I got like a mid-high C average because work was my priority. I was newly married. Then I had a kid. Well, at 59, I decided to go back for my master's degree, not because I wanted to earn money, not because I wanted to launch an online education business. I did want to do that. But more importantly, I wanted to know what I didn't know yet that would be useful for the audience that I was going to help. And along with 30 to 35 sessions a week, I had this 15 to 20 hour study block that I had to devote to school. And I got a 3.94 GPA for my master's degree, not because I worked harder, but because I had applied discipline in a way that had served me and I was identified with the idea of progressing towards my goal, even if I hadn't finished the master's. So the
That's often
discipline,
what I tell my students, like in graduate programs, is that you have to figure out a way to integrate it into your life. You can't do it on the side.
right? Absolutely.
Um, Dan, what else would you say about? Um, I've been curious about this, thinking about this as you were um, talking about when do you see aha moments, or what are some of the aha moments you see with clients?
Um, Coincidentally, on the tail of what you just said, if somebody's trying to get to a different level of fitness for whatever reason, if it's more internally driven based on quality of life, then I want to be around for my kids and all that stuff, it runs deeper. But a lot of times they're not there yet, right? And so they're engaging me or someone like me in part to continue moving that process forward. When they get to the point where they don't feel quite complete without some element of the practice a few times a week, fitness and nutrition, when they get to the point where that feels like part of who they are and they make that jump from the goal, the external goal, to the internally driven discipline, that's a high for both of us. Because then I know, I mean, ironically, they sort of don't need me as much anymore, which I'll celebrate. But that's an aha moment for them that doesn't come for everybody, and it comes to different, in different degrees. And so that's when I kind of revert to what I was talking about before. I help
Makes
people how,
sense.
yeah.
And as you work with people, how do you measure progress? How do they have a sense of growth or change or development?
So we have, we'll have loosely bundled quantitative metrics. Like I can see when somebody can reach down further on the floor with their backs flat because the hamstrings now are allowing them to get to that, that deeper degree of flexion of the hips. And I know that means the next time they bend over to put their shoes on or pick up a bag of groceries, they're less likely to hurt their back. I'll bring their attention to, hey, this is what you're doing that's different than 3 months ago, and here are the variables we're putting together that make this more difficult than what you were doing before, and you're doing it better, and it's harder. So that's kind of a quantitative, reference point that's helpful for them. But again, I'll go back to, I'm really more philosophical. There's more of a rationale for me than the quantitative metrics, because the whole idea about the quantitative metrics being the be-all, end-all evaluative apparatus is that, well, then you have to do this to get there, and then you have to do all that same stuff to stay there. And that might not be what you're in it for. So when I see people become more comfortable with the idea of it being integrated as a lifelong practice that makes them feel empowered, makes them feel more available and attentive and care more and get better sleep and model behavior for the kids. That's the holy grail for me.
Well, I love the tagline for OptWell50 plus, straightening the path for the mature aspiring athlete. There's so much power in that, Dan, straightening the path for the mature aspiring athlete. And opting well 50 plus, so much power in that.
Well, I wanted to give people an idea of how I might fit into the picture who are already on a path. And they don't have time for somebody who's trying to get them started on a path. They're further down the road, right? Like for instance, I'm playing in this band with a couple of musicians who were both full-time musicians, and they don't rehearse. I used to be in bands where we practice once a week and then we'd get ready for a gig and we'd do the gig. These guys are in 3 or 4 bands apiece. They say, send me the material. A week before, you do one practice and they've got 36, 40 songs down, ready to go. So some of the people that I deal with, they are really only looking for a very specific type of guidance, and that's really correction on what they're already doing, or the way that they're doing it. And I need to impress. It's not my goal to impress them. I need to show up with the tools to impress them that I have a value added in that equation. And then I prove it to them if I can.
And Dan, if people wanted to get in touch with you and OptWell50 Plus, how would they do that?
So probably the easiest way is just to go to the website. It's OptWell50plus.com. I think there are a few different ways on the website you can get a hold of me, but you can also send an email to team@OptWell50plus.com, 50plus.com. I do have a YouTube channel, but that's Dan Taylor MS CSCS. And then I also have a Facebook group. It's Science-Based Fitness and Nutrition for 50 plus or over 50 athletes. I think if you put most of that in, you'll get the rest of it. So yeah, I am very available. It's easy to get a hold of. Yeah.
We'll put all that in the show notes for this episode of the People Dividend. And Dan, just as we close out, last question, so you sort of wrap up 2024, what would be one piece of guidance or wisdom that you'd offer people?
Well, at the risk of sounding like all of our mothers, eat your vegetables.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I like that.
I want to give you practical validation for why I just said what I said, because it sounds pretty cliche. It is by far, especially among my athletic clients, the most underrepresented food group that would have the biggest impact on their health and their athletic performance. Sure. And the way I described it to somebody, I have very few clients who haven't had a remodel at their house. And I say, everybody's saying, protein. Protein is the building materials. Vitamins and minerals, which vegetables and fruit are not interchangeable. They have complementary nutrients. The micronutrients in vegetables and fruit to some extent, but mostly vegetables, think of that as the workers.
Right.
And their craftsmanship. Did the crew show up? Did they do a good job on the construction? Because you don't want just a bunch of, drywall stacked up in the garage.
Yeah, right.
You want beautiful walls and that
for sure.
Ceiling.
Yeah, that's great. It's good wisdom for this time of year. All right. Well, Dan, once again, thank you so much for being a guest on the People Dividend.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, and until the next episode, stay well.